My mother looked at me like I was a monster for screaming at my older brother. Just 30 seconds earlier, I had found the 30-year-old man physically blocking my girlfriend outside a crowded restaurant bathroom, aggressively grabbing her wrist and begging her to give him a chance. Instead of being horrified by his predatory behavior, my parents looked at me from across the dining table and told me I was being entirely selfish for ruining his vulnerable moment. They told me he was a grown man who could do what he wanted. That was the exact second the cognitive dissonance I had carried for 21 years shattered completely. I realized they weren't just enabling a creep. They were actively willing to sacrifice my partner's safety to pacify his delusions. So I stopped being the compliant younger son, and I decided to systematically dismantle their entire world. But to understand the sheer, terrifying audacity of the trap they tried to set for us, I need to take you back 4 months, to the first time I made the mistake of bringing Vanessa into their home. My brother Kyle is 30 years old, has never held a job for more than a few weeks, and permanently occupies the basement of my parents' suburban townhouse. He has never had a girlfriend. My parents treat this fact as a grand, tragic injustice, blaming modern society, the economy, and the entire female population for his isolation. They never blame Kyle. Meanwhile, I was the 21-year-old designated shock absorber. Because my father had destroyed his credit a decade ago, I was the legal co-signer on their townhouse lease. I was also the primary account holder for the family's cellular plan and home network. I quietly subsidized their lives to keep the peace, believing that family loyalty required silent sacrifice. That illusion began to crack the night Vanessa joined us for Sunday dinner. The moment she walked through the front door, the atmosphere shifted into something heavy and toxic. Kyle didn't just greet her. He locked onto her. He sat directly across from her at the dining table, entirely ignoring his food, his eyes tracking her every movement with a hollow, unblinking intensity. He interrupted me, mid-sentence, 5 separate times to loudly declare how lucky I was. When Vanessa politely thanked my mother for the meal and went to get her coat, Kyle cornered me in the kitchen. "How did you obtain a woman like her?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. He didn't ask how we met. He used the word obtain, as if she were a limited edition vehicle I had managed to purchase. I immediately told my mother that Kyle's behavior was completely out of line. She didn't even stop washing the dishes. She simply smiled a serene, detached smile. "Stop it. It's nice that he admires your relationship. It's good that he has women around him to learn from. Don't make it weird by being territorial." I didn't argue. Arguing with a delusion only validates it. But I started paying very close attention. Over the next month, every visit became an escalating exercise in boundary pushing. Kyle stopped pretending to be subtle. If Vanessa sat on the living room sofa, he would bypass 3 empty chairs to squeeze onto the cushion right next to her, his thigh deliberately pressing against hers. He would find any manufactured excuse to touch her shoulder when pointing at the television. The physical escalation happened on a Tuesday evening. Vanessa was standing at the kitchen island, pouring a glass of water. Kyle walked into the room, his footsteps completely silent on the linoleum. He stepped directly behind her, leaning in so close his chin practically rested on her shoulder, and audibly inhaled deeply through his nose, smelling her hair. "You always smell so good," he whispered, his tone carrying a terrifying, unearned intimacy. Vanessa froze, her knuckles turning white around the glass. I was standing in the hallway, 10 feet away. Before I could intervene, I saw my father sitting in the adjacent living room recliner. He was watching the entire interaction. He didn't look disgusted. He actually caught Kyle's eye and gave his 30-year-old son a subtle, encouraging thumbs up. I walked into the kitchen, physically stepped between them, and told Vanessa to grab her keys. On my way out, I told my mother that Kyle needed to back off immediately. She rolled her eyes, letting out a heavy, theatrical sigh. "He's just being affectionate. Not everyone has to be cold and guarded like you. You're overreacting because of your own insecurities." Then came the digital invasion. A week later, Vanessa's phone began vibrating endlessly at midnight. Kyle had quietly extracted her personal cell phone number from the family group chat directory without asking either of us. The first two messages were benign, asking about a movie we had discussed. But by Wednesday, he was sending massive, unprompted paragraphs at 3 in the morning. Vanessa handed me her phone in my apartment. I scrolled through the glowing blue text bubbles, my stomach dropping with every line. You are so different from other women. You actually see me as a person. You don't judge me like the rest of them do. You are so nice to me. I've never felt this way about anyone before. It wasn't a crush. It was the absolute textbook manifestation of a parasitic obsession. He was projecting his entire lifetime of failures onto her, deciding that her basic human politeness was an invitation for a relationship. What do I do? Vanessa asked, genuinely unnerved. You stop responding completely, I told her. Do not engage. Any response, even a rejection, is validation to him. She blocked his number on her phone. But that didn't stop the internal family machinery. The next evening, I drove to my parents' townhouse alone. I placed printed screenshots of the massive text paragraphs on the coffee table right in front of them. Look at what your son is doing, I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. He is stalking my girlfriend. My dad barely glanced at the papers. He picked up his television remote and unpaused his sports broadcast. So he has a crush. That's natural. She's a pretty girl, and he's lonely. You can't police human emotions. My mother picked up the papers, reading them with a terrifying expression of maternal pride. Vanessa should feel good that someone as guarded as Kyle trusts her enough to be vulnerable. His obsession is a compliment, and you are trying to ruin his progress. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I realized in that moment that I wasn't dealing with a dysfunctional family. I was dealing with a cult of three. I left the house and sent Kyle one final, explicitly clear text message. Stay away from my girl, bro. He read the message immediately. The read receipt appeared. He never replied. Vanessa completely stopped coming over to their house, which my parents immediately treated as an act of profound betrayal. My mother called me selfish, claiming I was destroying Kyle's newfound confidence. The tension simmered until the breaking point finally arrived at my father's 60th birthday dinner. They insisted on a high-end Italian restaurant downtown. Against her better judgment, Vanessa agreed to come, strictly as a favor to me, under the condition that we leave immediately after dessert. From the moment the appetizers arrived, the illusion of normalcy evaporated. Kyle sat directly across from Vanessa. He didn't eat. He simply stared at her. Not glancing, staring. It was a fixed, predatory gaze that completely ignored the surrounding conversation. It was designed to intimidate, to force her to acknowledge him. Halfway through the main course, Vanessa stood up, excusing herself to use the restroom. I watched the table. Exactly 30 seconds after she disappeared down the long, dimly lit hallway toward the back of the restaurant, Kyle stood up and silently followed her. I threw my napkin onto my plate and walked after him. The hallway was isolated from the main dining room. I stopped just before turning the corner, hidden by the coat check wall. I didn't intervene immediately because I needed to see exactly what he was doing. This was the midpoint reality check. I had spent months assuming Kyle was just a socially inept, harmless hermit. I was wrong. Kyle was standing flush against the bathroom door, physically blocking the exit. When the heavy wooden door opened, Vanessa stepped out and immediately stopped, her eyes wide with alarm. Kyle didn't move. He leaned forward, trapping her between his body and the doorframe. You look amazing tonight, he said, his voice entirely devoid of his usual stuttering hesitation. Also, you left me on read. Text me back right now. Excuse me, Kyle. Let me pass, Vanessa said, her voice tight but firm. She tried to step to the left. He moved with her, cutting off her escape route. Then, he reached out and firmly grabbed her left wrist. His grip wasn't a gentle plea. It was a physical restraint. Just give me a chance, baby girl. You know you want a real man. The delusion was completely weaponized. He wasn't a victim. He was an aggressor. I stepped around the corner, closed the distance in 3 massive strides, and forcefully shoved Kyle's chest with both hands. The impact broke his grip on Vanessa and sent him stumbling backward into the opposite wall. Back off. I roared, my voice echoing off the tile walls. Don't you ever touch her again. Kyle didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look sorry. He looked at me with absolute, undisguised hatred, as if I had just stolen something that rightfully belonged to him. He straightened his jacket, scoffed, and walked back to the dining room without a word. When Vanessa and I returned to the table to grab our coats, the reaction from my parents cemented my decision to destroy them. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't check if Vanessa was okay. My mother slammed her hand on the table, glaring at me with venomous fury. How dare you yell at your brother in public while he's being vulnerable? He is a grown man and can do what he wants. You are humiliating him. I didn't engage in a shouting match in the middle of an upscale restaurant. I looked at the three of them, perfectly aligned in their shared psychosis, took Vanessa's hand, and walked out into the cold night air. For 3 days, my phone was completely silent. No apologies. No demands. Then, on Friday afternoon, my dad called. His voice was unusually stiff and formal. We need to have an urgent family meeting. Come over to the townhouse tonight. You and Vanessa. It's incredibly important regarding Kyle's health. I knew them too well to think this was an apology. They were planning an intervention, but they fundamentally underestimated the kind of access I had to their lives. Because I was the administrator for their home internet, I could access the router's DNS logs remotely from my apartment. Before leaving for the meeting, I logged into the dashboard to see what had been occupying their bandwidth for the past 72 hours. I expected to find Kyle browsing more incel forums. Instead, I found a horrific digital trail of Google searches originating from my mother's iPad. How to convince family to share partners. Therapeutic surrogate services for virgins. Legal definition of financial compensation for intimacy. A cold, clinical clarity washed over me. They weren't going to ask me to apologize to Kyle. They were going to ask me to sacrifice Vanessa. I walked into the living room, sat next to Vanessa on the couch, and explained exactly what we were walking into. Her eyes widened in absolute horror, but as I laid out my plan, the fear slowly morphed into a hardened, icy resolve. Whatever crazy thing they propose, I told her, activating the encrypted voice recorder application on my smartphone and slipping it into my breast pocket. Do not yell. Do not run. Just play along, act hesitant, and name a price. I need them on record. We arrived at the townhouse at 8 p.m. The atmosphere was stifling, like a courtroom preparing for a grim verdict. Kyle was sitting directly in the center of the beige sofa. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit and a dark blue tie. Sweat was visibly beading on his forehead, glistening in the harsh overhead light. My parents stood on either side of him, arms crossed, flanking him like proud bodyguards protecting a dignitary. My mother gestured for us to sit in the armchairs opposite them. She didn't offer us anything to drink. She folded her hands in front of her, took a deep, theatrical breath, and delivered the most depraved monologue I have ever heard in my life. Kyle is 30 years old, she began, her tone carrying the cadence of a medical professional delivering a tragic diagnosis. He has never been with a woman. It is severely affecting his confidence, his mental health, and his ability to function in society. The isolation is destroying him. She paused, looking directly into Vanessa's eyes, completely bypassing me. Vanessa, you are the only woman who has ever shown him basic kindness. You have to help him. You have to take his virginity tonight. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I waited for the punchline. I waited for her to clarify that this was some bizarre psychological test. She didn't blink. My dad immediately jumped in, adopting the tone of a car salesman offering a practical compromise. Look, she's already comfortable around him. You two have been dating for a while. It's not like it's a big deal. It wouldn't mean anything serious romantically. It's just a one-time physical thing to help your brother get over the hump so he can finally start his life. I let the silence hang for 3 excruciating seconds, ensuring the microphone picked up the pristine clarity of their insanity. You want my girlfriend to sleep with my brother, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Vanessa is not doing that. Kyle should deal with his own psychological problems. Are you guys clinically insane? My dad shrugged his shoulders, a casual, dismissive gesture. Family helps family. That was the trigger phrase. Kyle violently pushed himself off the couch. His face was a dark, mottled tomato red, the veins bulging in his neck. The quiet victim persona completely vanished, replaced by furious entitlement. I deserve this, Kyle screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. I've been alone my whole life, while you get everything handed to you. You have the job, you have the apartment, you have the life. A girl like Vanessa would never look at me in the real world. Why can't you just share her one time? You owe me this. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my fists. I simply looked at my parents. They were nodding slowly, their eyes shining with validation, acting as if Kyle had just delivered a profound sermon on social justice. My dad turned his attention back to Vanessa, ignoring my existence entirely. So what do you think? We can make this comfortable for everyone. Everyone in the room stared at her. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. Vanessa looked at the floor, pretending to struggle with the moral weight of the request. She played the part flawlessly. She let out a long, slow breath, raised her head, looked my mother dead in the eye, and delivered the line that armed the nuclear bomb. I'll do it for $1,000, Vanessa said, her voice perfectly flat. My mother didn't gasp. She didn't show an ounce of moral hesitation at the prospect of buying a woman's body for her son. Her face immediately lit up with a triumphant relief of a successful negotiation. Deal, my mother said instantly, taking a step toward her purse on the counter. I can write you a check right now, or I can transfer it to your account. I reached into my breast pocket and pressed the stop button on my phone. The screen illuminated, showing a saved 12-minute audio file. I tapped the screen 3 times, instantly backing the file up to a secure cloud server. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and looked at the 3 of them. Deal, I echoed softly. Enjoy the rest of your lives. Vanessa stood up beside me. We turned our backs on them and walked out the front door, leaving Kyle standing in his sweaty suit and my mother holding her checkbook. As I locked my car doors, the counterattack immediately began. I wasn't just going to cut contact. I was going to surgically remove every resource, every comfort, and every shred of dignity they possessed. Step 1 was the reputation. My parents' entire social existence revolved around their standing at their local community church, a place where my mother loved to brag about her strong family values. I opened my email client on my phone. I drafted a new message, attaching the raw, unedited 12-minute audio file. I placed my mother's church pastor in the to field. Then I systematically populated the CC field with the email addresses of all 4 of my aunts, my uncles, and the director of the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. The subject line was simple. Just thought you should all know what's going on behind closed doors. Family helps family, right? I hit send. The social detonation would be absolute. By Sunday morning, they would be radioactive pariahs. They would never be able to show their faces in that community again, without people knowing they actively tried to buy a woman to service their 30-year-old son. Step 2 was the infrastructure. As Vanessa drove us away from the neighborhood, I opened my cellular provider's administrative application. Because my parents and Kyle were completely technologically illiterate, the entire family data plan was in my name. With 4 quick taps, I selected my mother's, my father's, and Kyle's phone lines. I didn't just pause the data. I permanently terminated the numbers and flagged the devices as stolen, instantly turning their $1,000 smartphones into useless glass bricks. Next, I logged into the Internet Service Provider portal and canceled the townhouse's fiber optic connection, effective immediately. Kyle's lifeline to his in-cell echo chambers was permanently severed. Step 3 was the legal execution. The following morning, Vanessa and I walked into the local police precinct. We sat down with a detective and played the recording. We didn't report Kyle for harassment. We filed a formal police report against my mother and father for the solicitation of prostitution, explicitly providing the audio evidence of my mother legally agreeing to pay $1,000 for sexual services on behalf of a third party. While the district attorney might not pursue a full felony conviction, The immediate consequence was a pair of uniformed officers showing up at their townhouse that afternoon to formally question them, ensuring the incident was permanently etched into the public legal record. The final blow landed on Monday. Because my father's credit score was a smoking crater, my name was the primary guarantor on the lease for the townhouse they lived in. Without my signature and my income verification, they didn't qualify to live there. I drafted a formal legal notice to the property management company, executing my right to withdraw as the guarantor at the end of a current 30-day billing cycle. 2 weeks later, the silence broke. I was walking out of a grocery store with Vanessa when a battered sedan pulled up to the curb. My father stepped out. He looked 10 years older. The arrogant, dismissive posture was completely gone. His face was pale, drawn, and absolutely exhausted. He didn't yell. He didn't demand compliance. He looked like a man who had just survived a shipwreck, only to realize he was stranded on a deserted island. "Please," my father rasped, his voice trembling as he stood 10 feet away, too terrified to approach Vanessa. "The church asked us to leave. The police have an active file on your mother. The landlord gave us a notice to vacate because you pulled your name off the lease. We have no phones, no internet, and nowhere to go with Kyle." He looked at me with wide, desperate eyes, tears pooling in the corners. "He's your brother. We're your family. You are completely destroying us over one mistake." I stopped loading the groceries into my trunk. I looked at the man who had demanded I share the woman I loved to pacify a monster. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, no regret. Just a cold, sterile satisfaction of a completed equation. "I'm not destroying anything," I said quietly, closing the trunk with a firm, metallic click. "You told me Kyle was a grown man who could do what he wanted. Now, you're a grown man who can face the consequences of what he wanted." I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away, leaving him standing alone on the concrete. They built an entire reality around accommodating a parasite and expected me to act as the host forever. But they forgot the cardinal rule of parasites. When you finally cut off the blood supply, the host survives. The parasite withers and dies.